All right. So this is the City of Santa Clara Homelessness Taskforce, the third meeting, and today is Thursday, June 23rd, and the meeting is going to go on from 6 to 8. So thank you everyone so much for coming, both panelists and attendees. So for our agenda for today, we're going to start out with our usual welcome intros and revisiting the purpose of the task force. We're then going to talk about outreach services. So we're going to explore outreach in the context of the entire homelessness system of care. We're also going to discuss the various forms of outreach with the panel. Each panelist has expertise in a different type of outreach. We're going to also brainstorm solutions to fill identified gaps in outreach in the city of Santa Clara. And then we're going to move on to our community engagement updates. So we're going to present to you the focus groups that we've identified based on the task force's feedback on who we should talk to during our focus group and community engagement process. We're going to provide a date for the community forum event or community meeting, and then we will do our wrap up. So our home-based team that's here today, so my name is Carla, and I'm here joined with my colleagues, Eli and Jesse, who are also here supporting the task force. The city team, so we have Andrew Crabtree, Director of Community Development, Adam Marcus, the Housing and Community Services Division Manager, Sergeant Gregory Dager, the City of Santa Clara Police Department, and then Jennifer Caravallo, Staff Aide to the Housing and Community Services Division. So our task force members, we have Lori from District 1, Vinay Hamilton from District 2, we have Dante from District 3, Daniel from District 4, Michelle is one of our task force members that is a community member at large. Anne McMahon, District 5, Kat Pham, District 6. Santiago is a community member at large as well. Sparky is from the Bill Wilson Center. Andrea Urton is from Home First. Hillary is from the County Office of Supportive Housing. We have Ray from Destination Home, and finally Vivian Wan from Abode. So just wanting to go over some of the Zoom norms for task force members. As always, we love to see your faces. If it's possible to turn on your video, that would be great. If for whatever reason you can't do that, that's totally okay as well. We just, it is nice to see faces in this virtual format. For task force members, if you do have a question, I think raising your hand using the Zoom function is kind of our preferred method, or you can use the chat. But I'm sure, you know, that there will be certain points during the meeting where folks can just kind of unmute themselves and pitch in. Keep in mind, we will be recording this session. And then if you know, any of you have issues accessing Zoom, just go ahead and send a chat to one of, you know, either me, Eli, or Jesse, and we can help you. Or if you get kicked off of Zoom completely, go ahead and email our City of Santa Clara at homebaseccc.org email. And we'll go ahead and assist you. We'll be monitoring that email. We also wanted to emphasize that we really encourage folks to mute themselves when they're not speaking. It really helps to reduce the background noise and, you know, ensures that anybody who's speaking at that moment is able to be heard. And if we do notice that somebody maybe forgot to mute themselves and they're not speaking, you may notice that we mute you. And that's only because we, to allow the person that is speaking to be able to be heard. Zoom norms for the attendees that are here today. If you have a question, please use the Q&A function to submit a question to the home-based team. We will be moderating the Q&A, and we might not be able to get to all of your questions, but all of your questions will be saved and will be reviewed for themes and areas of focus as we continue this work. We will be recording this session, just a friendly reminder. And then if you do have any issues with Zoom, you can go ahead and let us know on the Q&A, or you can also send us an email at cityofsantaclara@homebaseccc.org. Then just to go over our discussion guidelines and norms, because we will be having a Q&A and discussion about outreach today. Be as present as you can be. Respect others when they're speaking. We value all perspectives here, and everyone here on the task force brings a rich life experience that is part of what makes this task force so great. Speak from your own personal and professional experience. Listen to understand, step up and step back, allow others to engage, but be engaged yourself, right? Ask questions, respond to others. Let's make this a conversation. Respect others' thoughts and feelings, even when they're different from your own. So just a little reflection. We thought it would be good to, since we are halfway through with our task force meeting, so this is task force meeting number 3, we wanted to kind of just reflect onto why we're here and why this task force was created. So homelessness is a regional issue, right? It's not isolated to one city and within the boundaries of one place. And so there's a county-wide plan to end homelessness, which was endorsed by the city of Santa Clara and many, many other stakeholders. And in that process, we recognize that cities of all sizes have a role to play, but the role of different cities, especially depending on the size of the city, is going to be different than the role of the county, that the role the county plays in homelessness and the homeless system of care. So, the task force brings together diverse lived experiences to help the city of Santa Clara identify and prioritize the feasible actions that they can take within, the regional approach to ending homelessness. So just the goals of today's meeting, we want to delve into outreach and its role in the homelessness system of care, sort of what it does, what it doesn't do, what it might do. We want to give space for task force members to discuss outreach services and identify potential gaps that they see in the city of Santa Clara. And we also want to provide updates to the plan for community engagement and talked about how members of the task force can be involved and also how members of the public are going to be involved.
Thanks so much for getting us started, Carla. And we'll, if Carla ends up jumping off the meeting and back on, she's not leaving us. She's just trying to find better audio probably. So as Carla said, today's goals are really focused around outreach, learning a little bit more from some of the folks who do outreach in our community about what that looks like, what the role of outreach is, and primarily for task force members to discuss, right? What do you all want to see? Like, again, getting to that ultimate goal of the task force of identifying action steps. Are there things that you all want to put onto the table about steps that can be taken around outreach in the city of Santa Clara? And then again, after I'm done leading y'all through some stuff about outreach, the last thing we'll do in the meeting is to talk about that plan for community engagement and give you an update on that and move forward, getting you all involved in the community engagement process. Okay. Any questions about what we're going to try to do today? All right, our specific goal will be to have you all come up with suggestions, recommended possible action steps, again, to put on the table that we can come back to prioritize later on in the process once we've covered other topics aside from outreach. Okay, nope. Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about outreach services before introducing our very exciting expert panel today. We wanted to start by sort of framing what we expect outreach to accomplish, right? The role that it plays in the system, some of the things that outreach can sometimes accomplish, and some of the things that we don't want to rely on outreach for, that we don't want to expect outreach to do on its own as a service. So we know that outreach is key as a way to build relationships, to engage with people who are unhoused and who need support, right? It's a key point of engagement and trust building. Outreach is also really important to help address those basic human and health related needs. So outreach can include things like hygiene support, mobile showers, mobile medicine, food, clothing, things to help people stay safer and healthier outside. And outreach is a hugely important piece of a larger system of care. It is sort of one functioning piece. Outreach often does serve as an important access point into our coordinated entry system, right? So in order to get into that coordinated entry system, the person needs to be assessed. A person needs to be entered into coordinated entry. And for some folks, outreach is, the first place or the only place that that assessment can be done and that someone can get into coordinated entry. So this connection to coordinated entry can be a hugely important role of outreach, especially if the folks engaging with outreach don't have other contact with places where they can get into the coordinated entry system. Outreach can be a really important support for folks who are in immediate crisis, and can help to connect people with essential life-saving services like medical care, behavioral health care, and just things to the connections to services that will do things like keep human beings warm and provide food, and can also be a great connection into other parts of the system. So as we'll see in the next slide, one of the roles we can see that outreach plays is as a connection to shelter. Outreach is not prevention, right? So outreach won't prevent people from losing housing. That's true. Outreach doesn't do anything about the amount of housing there is in the community. Outreach doesn't do anything about the cost of housing in the community. And outreach on its own will not end homelessness in our community. Outreach on its own can sometimes be a bridge to permanent housing, but that is fairly rare. Right? It's a lot to put on an outreach program and the folks who work in them to be the sole source of support and connection for someone to enter permanent housing. Great question, Anne. So I see a question in the chat from Anne. Is the coordinated entry system countywide, and is it integrated among cities? Yes, the coordinated entry system is countywide. And the idea of the system is that it is sort of fully, it is standardized across all jurisdiction, across all cities, across the full county geographic area. So wherever someone presents and asks for help with housing, they'll get the same assessment and they'll be connected to the same pool of resources, depending on their eligibility for those resources. Great. Okay. So with this framing of sort of a beginning of framing of the role that outreach plays, we wanted to look at some of the numerical outcomes for outreach. And I know that our panel is going to talk about a lot of the sort of human, qualitative, and systemic outcomes of outreach. But what I have is numbers. So what we've done is looked at the past 3 years, or calendar year 2019, calendar year 2020, calendar year 2021. And we looked at all of the individuals that have a sort of a recorded engagement or enrollment in outreach with any outreach provider across the county. And we've zeroed in on those people who have a connection to the city of Santa Clara. And this connection to the city of Santa Clara, that's sort of a standard definition that we use to try to understand the countywide data by jurisdiction. It's a standard way of figuring out who has a connection to a city. And there's a reason why we have to look at such a wide variety of types of connection. This is the data that we have. In some cases, we'll have a client's address. In some cases, we'll have a person's answer to the question, where do you spend most of your time? In some cases, we'll have a zip code for the person's last address, most recent address, or an answer to one of these other questions. What we don't have in a way that can be pulled across the board is, where did this enrollment or service happen? Where was the person physically located? So I want to make that clear, because this is not 374 people who had an outreach contact within the geographic board boundaries of the city of Santa Clara. In fact, we know that most of this outreach did happen outside of the city of Santa Clara. Right? So we're not trying to demonstrate, the goal of this data is not to show the amount of outreach that's happening in the city of Santa Clara or the numbers of people. It's to give you an example based on people who have connection to this city of what the sort of the end outcome of a particular outreach enrollment typically can be. Like, what does that look like? So we can see that for actually the majority of these folks, for whatever reason, and this could be a variety of reasons, there wasn't information collected at the last engagement with that person. When this particular outreach project last had contact with a person, they weren't able to collect, where are you living now? Where are you going to be living? And that can be for a lot of reasons, right? People move around. This is very common for outreach projects to not have that exit destination, because people move, and an outreach provider might show up at the place where they know this person has been staying, and that person is not staying there anymore. And that's fairly common. But for the exit destinations, or the location at exit from the outreach enrollment that we know, 24% of all people, but the majority of the exits that we know, are to shelter or to an institutional setting. So when this person stopped getting outreach services, they were in shelter, or they were in a hospital, or they were in jail or prison, or they were in a temporary housing place, like interim housing or transitional housing. Only about 11% of folks would connect directly from outreach to a permanent housing situation. And for a number of these folks, that connection was actually through another program along with outreach, right? So there was a co-enrollment of someone in outreach and also a permanent housing program. And then we can see that just a small number of folks passed away, and a small number of folks just hadn't exited yet. They're still engaged in outreach. So again, we want to illustrate with this the way that outreach, what we can expect from outreach alone. We're going to be talking about outreach a lot today, so we want to start by talking about how the stuff we're talking about today is not an entire system. It's one piece, and it really needs to rely on the existence of permanent housing projects and on the existence of shelter that is welcoming to folks, and all of these other services in order to function as a part of this whole. Any other questions for me about the data or any of that framing before we go into the panel? Excellent.
Are these people on the street, or do you include people in RVs and cars?
It's a great question. So this data does include people who get outreach or connected to outreach and are living in their cars or in RVs. Yeah, there are actually at least one project that's specifically vehicle targeted outreach that's included here. Yeah. Question.
I have another question. So could you explain the difference between unsheltered and still engaged? Because I read this as those folks that were engaged from outreach, but if they're unsheltered and still engaged, what's the difference between
them? So what is the difference between someone who's unsheltered at exit and someone who is still engaged?
So like when they left outreach, they're still unhoused and then
Right.
still engaged. Okay, they're still working with.
If someone has it with outreach, I mean, this type of quote unquote exit data gets a little bit complicated, and actually someone who's on the panel might be able to give a more accurate response than I am. But my understanding and my guess would be that there are sort of standards for when someone gets exited from outreach, and that may vary based on the outreach project. And so if you're no longer going to be providing outreach services to that person for whatever reason, you would exit them from the project, and you wouldn't still be working with them. But if someone is still engaged, then you would expect to try to find them in the next outreach, next time you go out to do outreach. And Hillary, I see you coming off mute, and I'm going to call you out.
I think that you explained it beautifully, Eli, and I don't necessarily need to add any more. Unsheltered could mean that people no longer want to engage with an outreach team, or that an outreach team hasn't been able to locate them again, but don't have any evidence that they've moved somewhere else. So that's the disposition, if you will, when they are unenrolled from the outreach program. And the still engaged would mean that they're still enrolled in the outreach program.
Yeah. It is a really good and a really relevant question, I think, because for understanding data like this, because in a shelter, when someone is enrolled, they're staying at the shelter, and when they're exited, they're no longer staying at the shelter. When someone's in a housing project, right, they're receiving specific case management housing services, and when they're exited, they're no longer. When someone is engaging with outreach, there's not a physical space that they're living in that is defined by that outreach, like a shelter. There's not a, even a necessarily a specific set of services that they're regularly engaging with. There is human beings going out into the community saying, hey, how are you doing today? And having a conversation. There's different ways outreach can look, but that's a really common one. And so losing contact with someone is relatively common. And it makes that when someone's enrolled, when someone should be exited, a little bit more gray than with other types of projects. Okay, thanks for the questions. We're going to jump into our panel. So we have a lot of folks with us today who know a lot more about outreach than I am. We have 4 people who we have asked to talk to you and to speak about different aspects of outreach and different types of outreach. As I mentioned just now, outreach can look a lot of different ways. There's outreach that is really focused on, making sure people have food, basic needs, that someone is checking in about what services do you need to be connected to. Thank you, Jennifer. And I see that I hear that you had your hand up and I missed it. I apologize. Do you have another question or comment?
I just had a question about the permanent housing line there that says living situation at exit. I don't know if I'm simplifying this too much, but do I read that to say that if you were to look at kind of like effectiveness of outreach for permanent housing, then it would be 11%, and that a goal, for instance, could be, let's raise that to X percent, or is that fair to say, or not really?
I think yes and no, depending on how you look at it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you're reading it correctly for sure. I would say that this, of everyone who had contact with an outreach in our community, in the county, Santa Clara connected folks, right? Of everybody who had contact with outreach, 11% at the end of that outreach engagement, we're in permanent housing, right? So it is the rate of permanent housing connection for folks who are enrolled in outreach. There's a couple of things that I think complicate this if we're looking at this as like an outreach outcome. One of those is that it's very, very likely that a lot of these folks were duly enrolled. We're enrolled in we're receiving outreach services, but we're also then connected to a permanent supportive housing project or a rapid rehousing project. I didn't cross pull that data for to display here, but we know that that is often the case. Like outreach connects someone to coordinated entry. Outreach continues engaging with that person as the person is in coordinated entry. Maybe the person receives a referral through coordinated entry. They're still engaging with outreach because they're still outside at that point. And then ultimately they're exited as they go into housing. That is something that does happen.
Which is why you're emphasizing that there's these parallel approaches in order to increase the numbers, so to speak, in order to, you can't parse it out as easily as that. Okay, thank you.
Exactly, yeah. All right. Okay. Now I am going to throw to our wonderful, knowledgeable panel. So as I sort of was starting to preface, there's a lot of different types of outreach, a lot of different goals of outreach, and a lot of different models, and a lot of different ways outreach looks even in our community, right? There's a lot going on. So we've asked some folks to come and share briefly with you their sort of a little bit about their perspective and their sort of piece of the outreach pie. We have Andrea Urton with Home First. We have Hillary Baroga with the County of Santa Clara Office of Supportive Housing. We have Sergeant Dager, who you have all met. And we have Sketch Salazar and Mike Eckhart from the Lived Experience Advisory Board to speak on peer outreach. And so I'm gonna let each of these folks explain their sort of their piece of outreach and the sort of what they see, and then we're gonna give you all a chance to ask them questions once we've heard a brief introduction and presentation from each of them. So the some of the questions that we prompted the panelists to think about, and if you don't hit on all of these, that's totally fine. They're just suggestions, things to think about, but we're interested in hearing what are the goals of the particular type of outreach you do? How do you decide where to go in outreach? Things about like, where do you see a lot of need? What are the outcomes you're seeing and expecting? But really, whatever you think is most relevant to your particular outreach piece. So, Andrea, would you be willing to kick us off?
Gladly, thank you. So I do have a very active dog. So if Lulu is barking, I do apologize. So what are the goals of each type of outreach? And I think Carla or Eli, you explained that beautifully. I would say the number one issue that we're out there to do is engage. We want to build relationships with people, because the more we do that, the more we can get them to trust us. So the goals are to educate people on the resources that are out there, to make sure that there's a VI SPDAT conducted on every single person that we encounter, that they are updated when we need to update them if there has been a critical health incident or something else that has changed in their life. And we want to make sure that we're connecting people to resources. So we take a lot of hygiene kits with us when we go out. In the winter, we're taking gloves and socks and hand warmers. In the summer, we're taking, chapstick and other things that are more critical during that time. We also are big in making sure that every single woman that we encounter has enough feminine hygiene products or incontinence products to last them for an entire cycle. So there's a lot of resources, including water and other things that, whether it's coats or sleeping bags, that we are taking out into the community with us. We want to make sure that people are informed about the services that are open to them. They are connected to our coordinated entry service so that we can get them enrolled and on the list for services, and that we stay engaged with them so that we can find them if their name comes up on a list, and we're able to move them into permanent housing. Of course, the focus on the interim is always shelter, but in many cases, people just are not willing to go to a congregate site, which is understandable. If you've experienced a great deal of trauma on the street, it makes sense that you would not want to be re-traumatized by a loud environment with lots of people you don't know where your things could be stolen. So we have to think about some of the negative aspects to congregate shelters as well when we talk about people not wanting to go there. We currently have 4 different outreach programs. I want to say 2 of them are with the city of San Jose. One of them is with the county, and one is that we will be launching will be with the city of Sunnyvale. Our first is the Permanent Supportive Housing and Rapid Rehousing Outreach Team. Our goal with that is to locate people, determine their eligibility, help them complete the application packets, including the homeless verification, and then warm handoff with the agency that's been assigned to their case. And so we do our best to stay engaged, that make sure that these folks are staying connected to their provider and they're getting moved from homelessness into these programs that they've been called to enjoy. Second one is our citywide San Jose outreach program. This again is around engagement, providing education on resources, linkage to our community engagement queue, street out-based case management. So we're working with people on trying to help them get their IDs, helping them get their birth certificates. We're transporting them to shelter when they want to go. We're doing housing problem solving. We're walking people through what have you tried, what haven't you tried, how can we find something that might work for you. And we're also responding to community concerns through that program. And the other thing we do as part of that program is what's called backpack medicine. So if we're out there and we identify a veteran, let's say, who's homeless, who has served, we immediately, the outreach team immediately connects with our veteran services, and they go out to find the person so that they can get engaged with the wealth of services that the VA offers to folks. So it's really kind of an internal coordinated entry system as well. The other thing that happens on a regular basis in our outreach team is, they identify people who are in need of medical care and they're unable to access it, or they're not sure where to go. So we actually have a program called Backpack Medicine where we coordinate with the Valley Homeless Health Program, and we let nurses and doctors know, hey, this guy's diabetic, he's out there, he's got open wounds on his legs. And so we'll take them out there to make sure that they're getting the care they need. This program has been going on, predates me by far, and has been hugely successful in saving all kinds of lives. And then finally, one of the programs I'm super excited about to see some of the outcomes as they start to come is it's called Services, Outreach, Assistance, and Resources. And it's a Soar Outreach program. Soar is a multidisciplinary approach, and it provides services using a navigation approach. So it blends street outreach, case management, evidence practices such as harm reduction and recovery principles, motivation interviewing, and harm reduction housing first. So what we're trying to do is, even though people are in a camp setting still, we're starting to educate them on addiction and other mental health challenges and how they might be better to start on the road to some kind of recovery so they can increase their skill set and hopefully get housed, and then they'd have the skill set to stay housed. So this is a great program. How does our team decide where to go? Great question. We have two approaches. We have a proactive approach and a reactive approach. The proactive approach is the city of San Jose basically maps out the largest encampments that they want us to target, and we go there. The reactive approach is the city gets a bunch of phone calls of some of the camps that are causing the biggest problems in the community, or where people seem to have a really high acuity. And so we then also fold those into our daily outreach visits. We're also partnering, like I mentioned, with the city of San Jose or Sunnyvale, which is really, really excited. What is the volume of the need? We've got over 10,000 people who are homeless in our community. The need speaks for itself. We don't have enough permanent supportive housing. We don't have enough affordable housing. We don't have enough emergency interim housing, and we don't have enough shelter space. So, I mean, the volume of the need is huge countywide.
And Andrea,
we've got over 10,000 people homeless on our street, right?
I so apologize for interrupting you, but if you could wrap up, we're gonna
sure.
Absolutely hear from you more when we get to the Q&A.
So another thing I want to address is the majority of the people we engage with, over 1,500 folks on a regular basis through outreach. The majority of folks engage with us. So when we ask people if they want to engage with us and if they want help and they want housing, they say yes. That's what I'd like to end on.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Andrea. We appreciate it. So folks, if you have questions for Andrea, make sure you keep them locked in your brain, write them down, and we'll have Q&A after we've heard from all of our panel. So I'm going to ask Sketch with the Lived Experience Advisory Board to share with us. And Sketch will be speaking initially, but both Sketch and Mike are going to be here for the Q&A. So go ahead, Sketch.
Hi, everybody. My name is Sketch, and I am with the Lived Experience Advisory Board of Silicon Valley. So for us, we're about peer outreach. So the Lived Experience Advisory Board, we're all people with lived experience of homelessness and or are currently homeless. And we have our own outreach. It's myself and my colleague, Mike. And what that entails is just us, me and Mike and another member. We meet up on Friday afternoons at city team, and we have been getting 200 bags of food already bagged up, and we load them up and take them out over the weekends. But we actually just upped that to 300. So we picked it up last week, and then come Saturday, Sunday, as many members as possible that are available from the Lived Experience Advisory Board, we meet up at 10 a.m. and anybody can come. I've had friends of mine, like we call them our allies. They come out and will help as well. And we all have our awesome bright orange leaf shirts that we'll wear. And we just go out there. Something we do to like just create more unity as well is on the third Saturday of the month, we just really hype it up. And so more members usually come out, or more allies, and we hit bigger, larger areas. For us over here, the biggest one right now is, we call it Spring and Heading, or Columbus Park over here off of Coleman and Heading, Taylor area. So we were there this past weekend, and something we are looking at doing, and we brought up, and it's in the works right now in communication, is pairing up with some caseworkers to be that middle person. So something that we aim to help in is being that connector between the two. Having had lived experience of homelessness, housing was it was always something wanted, but it's a safety issue for some people, especially for women like myself when I was out there, or transgender or homosexuals out there. If you're witness going to those booths that are up, or if you're witness talking to one of these organizations, it's a security issue, right? And when I was seen doing that, I was hurt, assaulted and hurt the next day. So for me, being part of the outreach for Leave I'm really passionate about it for that reason, right? So these people easily approach us. Some of them remember me when I was out there, and they know my colleague Mike. They know a lot of us, and they're like, "Oh my God, what's up? How are you?" Right? So we have that immediate rapport and the ability to just really connect with them at their level and meet them where they're at. We also are, like last weekend, we took out hygiene kits. We were able to do that. And because we are hands-on and out there and talking, and just part of the thing that we really promote, our chairperson loves to tell us, is just talk to the people, right? It's not just about dropping off a bag of food and okay, bye, right? Is we'll talk to, hey, what's up? Oh yeah, you saw me. Oh, my name's this, right? What's your name? And just get to know them, talk to them, to where this past weekend I was helping out. We did a little beta of some surveys, right, of just basic needs, right, to just assess their basic needs. And they were just really engaging and excited to share what that looked like, right? And just being able to talk with us and not have that stigma attached to it, right? Because the other people that are watching them it's not a security issue. Like, they know we're just there, we've been there, we're trying to help out each other because we've been where they're at, right? And so when some people, they may not want the food, and sometimes it's a pride thing. Sometimes it's they just have a lot of food because they go to soup kitchens or other locations to get food. And that's okay too. So we'll just keep it moving. But word of mouth is really important. So when we're out there, when we're out there, we're just able to communicate what's going on in the community. And that's, honest to God, the best means of getting information to the unhoused, because phones aren't always charged. Flyers get lost or thrown or just added to the trash pile, right? So word of mouth is really important. So me and Mike and my colleagues will take whatever information we have, and as we're out there, we're like, hey, did you know this? Did you know that? And it just really gives us the ability to connect with people, and we walk the trenches, right? So like Mike, everybody's out there in the creek. And we're starting to collect data, right? So that's part of the role I do, is I'm collecting data on how many bags we're taking to what areas. And we're able to assess where we're gonna go every week by just a simple discussion. We all have lived experience, so we all know different areas of the city. And we're like, hey, did you know there's a camp here? Or hey, let's go here. And we're able to really just kind of give a overall dynamic to the city of the Lived Experience Advisory Board and how we are with like treating the unhoused. So that's all I have for us. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Sketch. Really appreciate it, and thank you for the work that you do. So, and again, if you have questions for Sketch and Mike, they will be here during the Q&A. And I'm going to ask Sergeant Dager, would you like to go next?
Sure, just want to make sure the audio is working okay with the video.
Can hear you, yeah.
All right, excellent. So hello, everyone. I'm going to keep this kind of brief because I think we'll get more from probably the questions that are asked. Basically, the police department, our piece in this chain is to kind of be a connector. We obviously get a lot of calls and emails, and it basically comes in every kind of form that are related to homelessness. And then part of what my unit does, and we've discussed it before, is the mental health outreach and respond to people that are experiencing mental health crisis. And there's a lot of overlap, obviously, between people experiencing homelessness and the mental health issues, which is kind of why we're all, it's all under one umbrella for our unit. So we are very reactive as opposed to being proactive, just because of the sheer volume of calls that we're having to respond to. But every time that we go out, we try to assess, what's the main issue here. If it's somebody who is experiencing mental health, issues, then we kind of vector them towards the resources there. If it's not so much that, but it's perhaps something else, or they're just kind of down on their luck, hard time, whatever, then it's much more like housing focused. So that's kind of the two main camps that we divvy up how we're going to direct, where we connect people to resources and services. We are very cognizant of the fact that, as police officers, sometimes people are, hesitant to speak to us, whatever. So I don't know if we've discussed before, but my entire unit, we don't wear uniforms. There's no insignia to, show that we're police officers, because we do want to try to build that trust and form a relationship with people. We're certainly not out there trying to arrest people or issue citations or anything of that sort. but rather trying to just show like, hey, you know, and I've got countless stories where people, they'll hear that we're with the police department and be initially hesitant and whoa, we're not those kind of cops. We're just trying to help. And instantly like the temperature kind of gets dropped, right? And then we can try to have a productive conversation and see, hey, what's the barriers for you and how do we best get you into, you know, a better situation or get you connected with the appropriate resources. Unfortunately, still with that approach, we get refusals overwhelming majority of the time. I mean, like 90+% of the time, where they just don't want to accept services for whatever reason. And there's probably a lot of factors into that. And sometimes with the mental health thing, I guess just to bring it full circle, that's a tremendous barrier for us, because if we're trying to talk to somebody about, you know, resources or services that are available, and they're in a mental state where they're not even comprehending the conversation, let alone being able to like understand exactly what we're trying to offer them. Obviously, it's a huge barrier. Sometimes we get it, you know, come across people that are in experiencing crisis mentally, and they, you know, that's a state where, like, I guess what I'm trying to say is, you know, it's kind of like the de-escalation piece with police work, where we need to have a willing participant. We need to have somebody that's willing to like work with us and listen to the conversation, be open to that conversation and work collaboratively. And if the receiver of the message is shut down for whatever reason, then we're kind of at a standstill, you know. And unfortunately, that does happen, but we do have successes as well. So that's kind of the police department's role in this whole picture.
Great. Thanks for sharing, Sergeant Digger. And next, we're going to go to Hillary.
Thanks, Eli. So again, I'm Hillary Baroga with the County of Santa Clara's Office of Supportive Housing. And I want to briefly mention just 3 of the types of outreach that the County of Santa Clara either delivers directly or funds through contractors. And I think that the theme of these outreach programs is that the county focuses on its outreach on health-related issues, because that's one of the county's primary lines of business. So Andrea mentioned one of the outreach sort of programs that we have, the Valley Homeless Healthcare Program, and it's part of the county's health system, and does both mobile medical vans and the backpack medicine that Andrea talked about, and is really focused on people who are unhoused who need access to primary health care. And so people who are unhoused can go to the Valley Homeless Healthcare Program either through a medical clinic or through the site-based clinics and get access to health, and with drop-in appointments. They don't have to schedule an appointment. And then also outreach teams that aren't necessarily the doctors and nurses can call for the backpack medicine team to respond where the people are. And they decide where to go based on the size of an encampment population, or the like if there's a drop-in center that's popular, that they'll park the mobile medical van there. The backpack medicine is really driven by where outreach workers tell them there's a need, or by large encampments where they can see a lot of people, because they want to maximize the resource and not just be waiting around somewhere for somebody to access medical services. The other 2 outreach programs that I want to talk about are focused on mental health and behavioral health concerns. So through the Behavioral Health Services Department of the county, we have a mobile crisis response team, and our mobile crisis response team is really focused on assessing crisis situations that appear to have a behavioral health component related to them, and specializes in putting clinicians with law enforcement in the response to meet individuals. As Sergeant Digger was saying, it's making sure that there's an opportunity for people to know that it's not just a police response, that there's a clinical person there as well. And And I think that that results in a lot of situations being de-escalated. With our mobile crisis response team, visits have increased from 414 in 2019 to 1,828 in, so that's 1,828 in 2021. And the calls for my mobile crisis response in that time increased from just about 1,100 to nearly 5,100 last year. And the team sees spikes in volume corresponding with COVID surges, which is interesting to me, but not surprising. And the mobile crisis response team serves both unhoused people and housed people. So I think it's important as one of the ways that the system provides outreach. And then the last program I'll talk about is our HEAT team. So it's the Homeless Engagement and Access team. And HEAT is ongoing street-based mental health treatment and services that use a specialized outreach team where the outreach team is out on the streets, and then they coordinate with county clinicians and other departments. In our HEAT team, we are the outcomes that we target are linking people with serious mental illness to clinical teams, connecting clients to the Valley Homeless Healthcare Program, and ensuring that clients are seeing some improvement in their housing situation. And I think the thing that I will add about that final outcome is that we usually do not intend for outreach to be the mechanism that results in someone's housing. Outreach is really for us focused on building rapport, getting people connected to the systems that are set up to connect people to housing, and helping meet basic needs. And so I think earlier when we were looking at the data and the 11% was it of people went to permanent housing. In some instances, in my head, that's a happy accident or a wonderful coincidence, right? So we love it when people can get straight through an outreach case management situation into housing, but it's not often, it doesn't happen often. You know, you saw just 11%. And that's because a lot of times people who are unsheltered don't have the resources and means to become homeless without some sort of subsidy or assistance. So I think that that's just one thing I wanted to note. And then I do think that at some point there was a question, Eli, on the list about what are the challenges for small cities. I'm happy to touch on that a little bit now or wait until later discussion if you'd like.
Yeah, I think if we should move on to Q&A, but I imagine that will come up in the course of questions folks have about outreach. So we are going to move to that now. So we've heard from our 4 panelists. So we heard from Andrea, Hillary, we heard from Sergeant Dager, and we heard from Sketch. Sketch had to leave us at 7 for another engagement, and so Mike is going to be here and fielding questions related to lived experience outreach and the LEAB work. Adam, I see your hand.
Yeah, I have a question, but
oh, getting in line, fantastic. Okay, so for folks who have questions, Adam modeled excellently. Go ahead and raise your hand and we will try to call in order. Adam, go for it.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Eli, for setting up this discussion. So I think one question I had was, again, kind of bringing it back to, we're a smaller, medium-sized city next to a really big one. We're next to San Jose. San Jose has lots of outreach programs, as we've heard. And I think the question, there's two questions. One is, which of those programs come to Santa Clara? And I guess the other question is more of a lived experience question is transportation a viable way of doing outreach? In other words, is asking people to transport or helping them to transport to San Jose an effective means of outreach for a city like Santa Clara?
Anyone want to take that question?
I'll attempt to take that one. Let me see if I have this straight. So you're asking if transportation would be a key factor for your outreach to Santa Clara to transport into San Jose's program, or?
Well, it seems like there's a lot going on just next door, and it's not clear whether people are getting, I mean, aside from our outreach with our police department, it's not clear whether these other forms of outreach are here, and if people are finding that outreach when they go to San Jose, for example, to reach the shelters there. There's other resources nearby. So I guess I'm curious if people are feeling like that is meeting their needs, and that going over to San Jose, whether it's hopping on BTA or potentially getting a ride some other way, is that something that people are doing? Is it working? Or is there a need to have more local outreach and bring some of those services into the city, these smaller cities, when they're kind of right next to us?
I could speak a little bit to that. So we were working with the city of Milpitas for a long time to get them to have an outreach program. The city of San Jose pays for outreach just for their geographical area. And so we go into the encampments and people wouldn't be able to take the bus to get to one of those camps. They wouldn't know when they would be there, right? So that's really not something that is happening, nor is it really feasible to happen. If the city of Santa Clara wanted to pay for a small outreach team themselves, then that's absolutely something that could happen. Mind you, teams have to be at least 2 people because we can't have people going out by themselves. And I'm sure Hillary can speak to some of the outreach countywide. We are more focused on the city of San Jose, although we do have, we would go to find somebody for a rapid rehousing program or a permanent supportive housing program to make sure that they were getting those services.
I think, Adam, the concept of transporting people, I think is, it's like, what do you want to send them to receive? So, for example, there are mobile hygiene trailers that set up on a schedule throughout, and it could be throughout the county, and it could be very common that, a lot of the stops are in San Jose, but not the smaller cities. And so for something like that, if there's not another resource, then maybe that makes sense. But as Andrea mentioned, going to trying to find an outreach team to just have a conversation with someone isn't necessarily, that's not something that I would necessarily recommend. And then I think with regard to your question that about what programs come into other cities, the county's programs do go to other cities. So we are not San Jose centric. And I think that the reason that a lot happens, especially from an outreach perspective in San Jose, is that the city, that city has funds that they can use to pay for it. They're because of their size, so it's not that it's a difficult thing. And then I just want to say to folks that Sparky has put some good information in the chat about the Here For You hotline. And then I do want to just turn back to Mike to ask, Mike, do you think, like, based on your experience, do you think that having help with transportation in some way would motivate somebody to go from like Santa Clara to San Jose?
Absolutely, it would motivate a lot of people. From my experience, from a lived experience standpoint, we know the city of Santa Clara has very little homeless compared to other outer regions, Milpitas, places like that. From a lived experience, I think bringing your own outreach into Santa Clara would be the best way to go. A lived experience outreach would be quite meaningful and probably pretty productive in Santa Clara.
Thanks all. Thanks, Adam, for that question. Thanks for your thoughts, panelists. Any other questions? Don't see any hands, but I know you probably have questions.
I did want to say to everyone, your fellow task force members was able to join, and she was just having.
Carla, I'm sorry, your audio cut out just as you were saying Michelle, our valuable task force member's name.
Yes, Michelle just got on, and she was just having some technical issues. So I just wanted to wish that she is on right now, and yeah, welcome, Michelle.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. I'm here. I'm not late. I'm just having difficulties. I've been on since 5:40. 5:50. I've just been having. I got a computer, so I went from the cell phone to a computer. So I've been learning how to, get that working.
Well, just thank you so much for keeping working and not giving up on us and getting through that technical difficulty and staying. So we really appreciate that. So yeah, any other questions? The floor is open. Things you're curious about outreach in the city of Santa Clara, anything that you want to know that will help you figure out, whether there's something to look into and around outreach for the city. Go ahead, Anne.
I have a question about in outreach, I think a few folks said that the outcome is not necessarily to get housing, to get people who are unhoused in housing. It can be a happy outcome. I'm curious about what's the percentage of people who, when they are assessed or if they enter this system, how many of them are saying, I want to get into housing, and how many are saying, I just need the basic services. I just need the direct service or the outreach that is being provided. I'm trying to get a sense of, when we talk about priorities, is it to move to the housing aspect, or is it to focus on the mental health, to focus on the services in situ for the people who are living unhoused in encampments or whatever? And that would help me understand, kind of as I think about priorities going forward, scale and scope, and how we divvy up the minimal resources that are eventually going to, we hope, be there. Thanks.
I'd be happy to start this off, and other folks should totally jump in and tell me to stop talking when I start to talk too much.
I will do that, Hillary. Don't worry.
I can always count on you. I think that, when we've taken a pulse of that, I would be really comfortable saying that when we say, do you want housing? 95% of people say yes. So it's not that people don't want housing. That's the thing oftentimes that they want the most. I think that what people don't want is to have to let other people make choices for them. and have and meet and be forced to meet milestones in order to access that housing. So we operate our programs on a housing first philosophy, which means we focus on the housing first and everything else concurrently or secondary. So you don't have to be clean and sober to deserve to have the right to housing. You don't have to attend tenant education workshops to deserve the right to housing. And so I think that that's like the tension that sometimes exists. I feel like I'm losing track of the question and standing on a soapbox. But I do think that
Hillary, I can cut you off here if that's helpful, because unless you have some closing thought.
Maybe I think that the value of outreach, and Andrea said it in her very first sentence, it's like, I don't know if this was the word you used, Andrea, but connection. Like, it's building that rapport, and that is the huge value from a system perspective for outreach, as well as helping understand and meet basic needs. Like, if all our outreach workers ever did was make friends and get everyone in a clean pair of socks, for me, at the end of the day, that's outreach well done. Because we could have a whole nother conversation about the feat of health of homeless individuals. But so I think it's like, for me, it's about how do we set a realistic expectation for what outreach can and should accomplish in our system, and then understand what it really will take to accomplish the goal that we have of everyone being housed. Now cut me off, Eli.
Thank you, Hillary. And Councilmember, I do see your hand, but I'm gonna see if Mike, do you have an answer to this question as well?
I do. I think the goal of outreach today is not only be transparent with everybody that is homeless, but be given the same information that is correct countywide. And everybody knows there's not enough housing for our homeless. So housing is not lived experience advisory boards outreach. That is not our number one goal when we go out for outreach. Our number one goal is to make sure that people that are experiencing homelessness are safe. They are getting the basic needs met, food, water. They're getting some companionship, and they're learning about the different resources that are available throughout the county. That's all the way from Gilroy to Menlo Park. And I think that's more important than concentrating on housing, because that is a minute, for a lot of people out here, that's not going to happen anytime soon. So we need to take care of basic needs besides housing, clothing, food, water, phone, a way to communicate, HMIS portal, things that they can get a hold of caseworkers when they need to. Those are our number one goals when we go out. That answer the question?
Thanks, Mike. Yeah. Anybody else on the panel or anybody else on the task force have thoughts on that and answer that question before we go to the next question?
Can't raise my hand. I'm driving it, Dante. But one of the things I would say is, when you're getting to know folks, know what their needs are, and if you're starting to hear a bunch of folks with similar needs, try to cater to those things, right? We hear out in a encampment a couple weeks back that, people's pets, their companions, their service dogs, they don't have food for them. And so that's something that we're trying to make sure that they're able to get to. So having this holistic lens of how do you serve the whole person is super important as well. And so just keep in mind, when you're out there or you're serving folks, ask them what they need, like, you know, and then if you start seeing these trends, start trying to advocate for those resources.
Thanks, Dante. We're going to go to our next question. That is Councilman Rudane. Go for it.
Yeah, clearly you've outlined the importance of outreach. I'm trying to get a sense of the resources and budget needed for this. Can you give me some sense of, I think Home First, Andrea was talking about how they have programs with San Jose and Sunnyvale. And I think you were saying that the number of people that are associated with Santa Clara or something like 350. So what kinds of resources would be adequate for Santa Clara? And
so for Santa Clara, I would recommend a small outreach team. You've got 374, I think is the number that I saw. 2 full-time people, a dedicated vehicle, and then we have plenty of supplies that we get donated, so probably wouldn't have to buy a whole lot, maybe some water occasionally, but everything else we get donated to us and could just funnel through. Hillary, does that sound about right? A couple $100,000, 2 people?
Yeah, for like rapport and socks, yes. And socks, I mean like the supplies.
Right.
Yeah, I think the first thing that popped into my head after your question was, what do you want to achieve? And that's just a me hang up. Like that's where I usually start. Like, what are you trying to accomplish? Then I can tell you.
I think it's a good question though, Hillary. Like, I mean, with all of these programs, we're talking about outreach right now, but I think it's important to keep in mind what the end goal of the program is. There is outreach that is meeting people's basic needs and alleviating their suffering while they're on the street. And then there's case finding programs, outreach programs, which are looking for people who've already been assessed in the system and getting them into the housing that's available. So, and those are wildly different strategies and goals. So it's, I think part of that framing is really important when you set out to design a local outreach program.
Right, that reminds me too that, some places use outreach to help improve their local unhoused populations' opportunities to get connected to supportive housing development in their city, because the way that our coordinated entry system works is that it's based on vulnerability and that type of priority, not necessarily geography. And so if there hasn't been anyone doing coordinated entry assessments for your local unhoused people, their chances of getting selected for a unit in a development being built in your city aren't as high. And so definitely investing resources in outreach to help people get connected to coordinated entry as new developments come up. And I know Santa Clara is such a great development partner in terms of cities. Like that is a way that you could also invest resources. And that can be done sort of in conjunction with improving quality of life for people.
Thanks, folks. And I want to go to Lori, who's had her hand up.
Hey there. So my thing is that
Lori, we're getting you really slow and robot-y.
Totally agree with that. But we were homeless for 6 months. We had a 5-year-old. Can you hear me or no?
Yeah, we caught your sound caught up to you.
No.
I think you're
any
okay.
better or no? Not,
yeah, it's okay.
Okay. So we were homeless for about 6 months. something I've worked since I was 13 years old. I've worked my entire life. I've never, had to do anything but work, raise children, and it was a very, very hard thing. And it was because I had to leave an ex-husband who was crazy, and I was with him since I was 15 years old. So, after being in the spot of being homeless, and literally there was a night we would go fishing and stay the night in the car just because that's what we had to do. And then we ended up staying in the Marriott hotels. We got really blessed. We had a family member who worked there, so we would pay $39 to $40 a night, and it lasted for about 5 months. And another month we had a couch surf, and then we finally was able to save enough to be able to get into a place. But what was really hard for me is that we knew somebody who was using drugs, and she ended up getting a brand new apartment downtown San Jose for $50 a month. And it was super sad. We knew her because somebody in the family who totally unfair, we felt, because here we are being, doing the best we can do, and, seeing and calling the number every day between 10 and 2 to hope to get into housing, hope to get something. And even though we paid taxes, from the time I was 13 until whatever, it was frustrating, it was frustrating. And so for me, I think, knowing that there's so many people that were homeless, and what's scary is we still go month to month, because we mentioned we had to get rid of our roommates that we had, and so we're paying double rent right now, and there's a possibility any day we can get a 60-day notice, so knowing that there's nothing out there unless we're super homeless and whatever, I don't know, it's scary to me, and it's sad all in the same thing. So I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, thanks, Lori. Thanks for sharing, and thanks for being here and showing up. It's this is not an easy evening to join a task force meeting, so thank you for that. Any thoughts on the sort of theme that Lori was speaking on before we go to the next question?
I just have a question. Raising my hand. Recently, I'm part of an organization. I joined up with an organization called Helping Hands, and there were some people like volunteers, because we're all like volunteers. We were trying to donate some items. Well, I was gonna ask the Home First CEO. I don't see her, but I wanted to ask her a question about. We wanted to donate some things to the Sunnyvale homeless shelter, Home First, and they were directing us to the main headquarters in Milpitas. And I'm thinking the community is trying to get involved and to help the homeless. So I'm wondering why they're directing us out of the community all the way out to Milpitas, to the main office. That was just something that kind of boggled my mind. So.
Well, that's a really great question, and thank you for asking that. So as an agency, we are responsible for actually reporting all of our donations. It goes on our tax forms, right? We have to let people know. And we were unable to get an accurate count of things that were being donated to the Sunnyvale shelter. Also, with just the mass intense donations that we were getting, we need to be able to sort them in a common space. And we do funnel things back to Sunnyvale that are specifically meant for Sunnyvale, but the shelters are not good places to keep the majority of the donations. And we had many donations that were just being hoarded at Sunnyvale and stored there. And many of the blankets and other things actually got ruined because they weren't in a safe, clean environment where they could be well maintained. So a lot of the donations, unfortunately, had to be thrown out. And so in order to maintain that doesn't happen in the future and that everything is kept clean and the way it needs to be, we have to sort everything at our Milpitas location and then bring them back as needed to Sunnyvale. And I know I've heard some grumblings that people are not happy about that, and we apologize for that, but it really is the best way to maintain the cleanliness of the donations and make sure that things are not wasted and taken care of.
Well, some of the items that we were donating were like brand new, sealed in the bag. There was no contaminants or any bacteria or viruses. We were just trying to like, because gas is expensive and nobody wants to travel all the way out to Milpitas when we can just, partake with the community, because the community at large do want to help the homeless. So that was just something that I was just wanting to get an answer to, because some of my co-workers were like, well, why can't we just give it to the homeless, on site?
We also have very limited storage at Sunnyvale. So we could always work up a pickup where we could meet you at the Sunnyvale shelter, and that we could take those donations back to Milpitas for you. We do have an community engagement specialist who's just assigned to Sunnyvale, and that's her sole responsibility.
Oh, okay.
So we're more than happy to take care of that.
So we couldn't just give it to the homeless person, like that's just coming out of the shelter?
We have to account for everything that we receive. And if that's the way that you do it, we can't account for that.
Okay.
Thanks. And I want to come back to Anne. Anne, you have a question about outreach?
Yeah, thanks. Two questions. One is, Ray, you mentioned something and I wasn't sure if I got it all. Outreach for coordinated entry, and it sounds like that's another aspect of outreach that the panel did not go into. Is that right? Okay, so I'd be curious to know more about that, because it sounds like a different kind of outreach that we would want to learn. How does that fit into the scope of things that could be eligible programming, and where funding could go, and in terms of recommendations? And then this might,
I think, Anne, just to jump in about that, what I mentioned about like targeting outreach to people locally as new developments are coming online is one, is basically what Ray is also talking about, is making sure that as part of the outreach program, whoever is doing the outreach is obligated to get people connected to the coordinated entry system. So doing the surveys that are required and making sure they're entered into our data system.
For potential housing.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, I see. Thank you. And then I wondered if in all of this, I know we've just covered one little piece of this big complicated puzzle. Is there some kind of like a workflow or a chart that shows, what does a person who is unhoused in an encampment have to do to get to, or to talk to, or the agencies, or what does this network look like of all of the things and all of the people on the panel? And because I'm having a hard time understanding it all, and it would just be helpful to have some kind of a chart that shows these are the avenues, these are the angles that you can go to get the kinds of services. And maybe that's part of the problem, actually. Thanks.
Yeah, great question. And I'm going to actually pull up something that is not exactly what you described, but I'm going to put it out as I think the closest that we have. And then Ray, Hillary, other folks can tell me if I'm wrong. Just pull it up. So the document I'm going to screen share is a supportive housing system map. This is a map of county, sort of the what we call the homeless system of care, the homeless response system, or the supportive housing system countywide. And it doesn't show, so Anne, what you were describing, like talking about paths, right? I know that it looks like paths. This is very high level. It's not necessarily going to map out, like these are all of the ways that you could move through the system, but it shows the different component parts of the system in a general way. So with prevention, with outreach, we know that affordable housing is sort of a foundational thing across all of the efforts to end homelessness. There's this coordinated entry system or coordinated assessment system, which can then connect people to permanent supportive housing, transitional housing, rapid rehousing, which are our programs that actually come with substantive, like really robust housing support. There is emergency shelter, right? And you can see sort of the relationship, the potential relationship between outreach and shelter, potential relationship between outreach and the coordinated entry system. But even, I mean, this is a very high level view, it's broad strokes, and it doesn't include all of the pieces like we talked about, you know, behavioral health supports and all of these other like supportive services that surround all of this. And it doesn't include some of the sort of, it's called housing problem solving, which is a new type of intervention that's funded across the county that is not on here. So, but does this get a little bit at what you were picturing?
It does. I was just thinking, you know, from a person's perspective, from a personal perspective, what does that look like? And how would someone navigate through rather than from a system perspective to make decision points along the way. But again, that's just for me to better understand. I don't know if that would be helpful to a person, you know, who's experiencing it. I'm just trying to understand it better, but thank you.
Any thoughts on that as a, like, is that a thing that exists? Are there materials that can help people navigate through, or is that sort of support for navigating the system mostly a human being? Any folks who are familiar with the system, can you speak to that?
I think it's more of a human being myself. Working the system right now, trying to find housing for myself. It is relying on another human being to take you through the steps that are presented in front of you.
And I don't know if anybody else wanted to comment, but I will say, Mike, even when we outreach, we hear sometimes folks, especially at smaller encampments, they feel like they never see services. They feel like they never, you know, like see organizations coming out to do outreach to them. So I'm not sure who asked the question, but to your point, yeah, it sometimes could be like hoping that you're going to see someone that can help you with the resource today. And if you're at a larger encampment, a lot of times, yeah, you do see people quite frequently. Anytime we go to Heading in Spring or Taylor, I mean, it depends on who you are. But when we go out there, we see, you know, providers. We see providers. It's a large encampment. It's easy. It's concentrated. Focused.
Oh, we lost your audio, Dante. Okay. Well, thank you, Dante. We've lost your audio, and I'm going to go to Santiago, has had his hand up for a while. After Santiago, I'm going to check in with Lori, and then Dante, I know you have a question, but we are going to be running short on time, and I want to leave us time for the end of the wrap up of the meeting. So Santiago, and then as much as we have time for the other folks, go for it.
Good evening, everybody. Is there like a map in place where organizations have who have the camps that are located in, like, and who has been outreached to?
Great question. So I think you're asking, it was a little bit jumpy, your audio, but I think you're asking, is there a map or a list of locations where encampments are, where people are living, and where different organizations are outreaching to? Is that the question?
Yeah.
Yeah. Anybody want to speak to that?
I think that the city of San Jose keeps track of the encampments where their contracted service providers have been going. The answer to your question is sort of, but not, I don't think it's whole, like it covers the whole county. So there, and then in the homeless management information system, there is probably also, in some cases, a record of outreach services being provided that may or may not include where that service was provided.
Yeah, the city of San Jose has a very detailed map. And we receive coordinates of where the largest encampments are, and then where some of the challenging encampments are, where we have to go and engage people and just ascertain whether or not they're safe. So city of San Jose has done a great job in mapping those things, yes.
Anybody else have, oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I think to acknowledge Dante's point of smaller encampments not getting as much service, I think that it is, I think that oftentimes funders utilize the outreach service to meet a dual need. And that may be why larger encampments get seen more often, because they're more visible, they have more people there. And I think that the other, I had another point about that, but yeah, it escapes me. So that's enough.
Thank you. Anybody else? Can anybody else speak to any other recording or mapping of outreach or encampments? Or move on.
I mean, just generally, the census, the point in time count. There's mapping of encampments at the point in time count. Each time by paid outreach teams. So it's just, we don't have, like, some communities have active heat maps that are regularly updated across the region. We don't have that here. I'm not quite sure I know what the benefit is of having that, of spending that much money actively mapping. I think I'd rather spend that money paying more of Andrea's staff to get larger outreach teams out there than exactly knowing where people are. I'd rather make sure we're getting to more people and getting more services than like charting their path.
All right, I'm gonna go to Lori and then Adam. Go ahead, Lori.
I'm sorry, did I not put my hand down? Sorry.
Oh, that's fine.
I won't waste anybody's time, sorry.
Oh, all right, thanks. And Adam.
This might be a segue into another meeting, but I guess the question is, if we were to have a lot more outreach, I know that housing takes time, and so we know that we need to build housing as quickly as we can. But can you give us a sense whether the other services are tracking with the need? So in other words, if we drive a lot of people to the various services that you described today, can they handle that? Or are there enough? Is there enough capacity there? Or is there also a need for more capacity all around outreach, services, and housing?
Yes, just the easy answer to that is yes. More resources are needed, more everything is needed. And we've got over 10,000 homeless people. We do not have 10,000 beds on any different type. So it's just all needed concurrently, unfortunately, if we want to make a dent in the problem.
Yep, completely agree. Community plan for homelessness calls for doubling the number of shelter beds we have in the region, adding 20,000 new housing opportunities. I think Santa Clara is doing its part in some aspects, but I think if we really want to get ahead of this, and for every one person that we're housing, 2 more becoming homeless, we really need a lot more tools in the toolkit, from prevention all the way across to permanent housing.
And to piggyback on Ray's mention of the community plan to end homelessness, if we really are going to tackle and end this issue as a region, it's about more than just the third strategy, which is improving quality of life, getting people basic needs in the field and providing shelter. It's about more than the existing supportive housing system, which is the second strategy, and scaling that and meeting its needs. I think that the first strategy in the community plan really focuses on addressing the systemic issues that are creating and causing homelessness and prevent us from, like, we can, you know, there's that terrible analogy about fishing the babies out of the river. Like, we could fish babies out of the river all day, but until we go upstream and figure out who's throwing the babies in the river, we will just keep catching babies with a net down the road. And I did not mean babies like to infantilize our unhoused neighbors. It's just a terrible analogy I've used for years.
I think until the real estate issue is settled in Santa Clara County, we have a long, hard road ahead of us, because prices keep going up for rent and ownership of property in Santa Clara County. Our homeless numbers are going to grow faster than we can get them housed. And that's an issue that I don't think anybody's even looking to tackle yet, is the real estate issue that we have in Santa Clara and Silicon Valley.
It never fails. Conversations always come back to housing affordability. It's this massive magnet that just pulls us in that direction, because it's a root, a core issue for sure. Okay, let us do, so I'm going to do one last call. Any questions? And then we're going to move to the next piece, which is, what are you going to do with this information, new information in your head now? But any other questions about outreach that you want to get out?
I just have one question. The person that was asking about the mapping, I know that it's a big like a big part of trying to see where the homeless encampments are, like the hard to reach places. So I will be willing to help the other individual, Santiago. Maybe not do all in one day, but like throughout the course of a couple of weeks, I'd be willing to like take my time out of my day to like let him know where those hard to reach places are, because I have, I've been homeless myself. So, but now that I'm housed, if he's interested, like I'd be willing to do that for you, to outreach, certain areas, hard to reach areas. Would that work for you, Santiago?
Yeah, I mean, I think a big problem is not knowing who's getting the outreach, and if they're getting it twice, and who's not getting it.
Well, I can tell you, Santiago, that we have 178 encampments in Santa Clara County at this time, and growing. And that was a count done by myself and one other person who took 5 weeks to driving to every encampment that the county and the city knew of, and actually visualizing if they're there or not. So out of 218, we came up with 178 active encampments in Santa Clara County at this time.
And as far as I have heard, and I obviously am not going to have near perfect knowledge, but that is the closest to sort of an enumeration, a map of where people are that I have heard of for the county of Santa Clara. And even that, like Mike, I know that with the LEAB outreach, like you're keeping that updated for yourselves as much as you can, but even with that, just there's so much change, there's so much movement for so many different reasons. I would imagine that would get out of date quickly if not maintained, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
You're absolutely correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I still have some friends that are still out there. I mean, I'm housed now, but excuse me. I asked them, and they still tell me, or they'll still tell me, but they told me that they haven't been outreach to, and they've been out there for a good minute. So it's just, I think, I don't know how it's being tracked by who's being outreached or not.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Makes a lot of sense. And I know that our folks who do leave outreach can really relate to and speak to that challenge of the, identifying where people are who aren't getting service. So I'm going to go to Dante for a last comment, because then I want to take us to the homework that we're going to ask you all for.
Oh no.
Yeah, I gotta cut off. But to Ann's point, I think that's also something is encampments move all the time, whether they're getting sweep, whether it's due to weather, whatever it might be. And so it's, it's hard to really keep locating where folks are until you're, boots on the ground and you're really going out there and visualizing where they're at. But that makes it hard to serve people. So when it comes to services, it really does make it hard to serve people, especially if they don't have adequate technology to communicate with you. So, this is kind of why we do what we do, with Leave, and we also really focus on like building that rapport and trying to have some form of contact, whether it's via person to person, because some people live in one encampment but know folks in other encampments, and that's just the nature of it. So, hey, when's the last time you saw such and such? And if they say over here, then we try to make sure we're checking on people and making sure we're getting people the things that they need, as best as we can.
Thank you for that. And thank you all for this great engaged discussion. Thank you to our panelists. We really, really appreciate you all being here to share your expertise. And thank you to our task force members. As always, we really appreciate your perspectives and expertise as well. So I did say the word homework. I used to be a third grade teacher, so I like to think that homework is just how we all support ourselves to grow and no.
You all gotta go now, Eli. Bye.
So what we want to do is we wanted to give time for you all to really explore outreach with our panel. And the next step, though, is, okay, what do we do with this? What do we do with this knowledge? And we've got a couple of questions that we would like you to think about between now and our next task force meeting. And you should feel free to answer these questions in whatever medium you want. I'm gonna send you a link to this Jamboard that you can all access. And if you want to just write your thoughts directly onto the Jamboard, you can click the link. I'm putting it in the chat now, but we'll also email this to you. I just want to give you a demo. If you want to add it to the board, you can. And you just come over here, you click the thing that says sticky note. It's the best way to do it. It's a little box that looks like a sticky note. It gives you a place to type. You say, what would I like to accomplish with outreach in the city of Santa Clara? Right? Maybe that's one thing you want to make sure to accomplish. Maybe that's, something. Or connections to behavioral health care, or connections to coordinated entry, right? We want to hear, what do you want to accomplish, right? Not specifically what type of outreach do you want to see or how much, but what would be your goals for outreach? And we'd like you to keep in mind some of the stuff we've talked about, right? Outreach is a part of a system. It's not on its own going to be the solution in any way. And like outreach can perform many different functions, right? And then our second question is, just for each of you, your one highest priority related to outreach. And this can be the same thing you put over here. It could be the thing you want to accomplish, or it could be, I think my highest priority is we need, at least one person with lived experience doing regular outreach in the city of Santa Clara. Or my highest priority related to outreach is we need to make sure that there is trash pickup happening to make sure that people aren't living outside in an area that has a lot of trash in it. Whatever that one highest priority is, go ahead and tell us. So as I said, you can add directly to this Jamboard at any time between now and the next meeting. You can also just email us. That is totally fine. If that's easier, you can give us a call if that's easier, any way you want to do it. Or if you want to save it to the next meeting, we can plan to do a quick check-in to see if anybody has anything to add. But we want to give you this space to sort of think about and process what you've heard, and let us know your answers to these questions. Any questions about our questions?
I have
Go ahead, Michelle.
I just wanted to ask, since we're down to almost like our 2 meetings, right, for like July and August, I was wondering, for the next meeting, if I could bring in homeless advocates that are on the front lines, helping the homeless population right now. They're always like advocating for the homeless and what is the necessary resources that could, you know, to some degree, help the homeless get off the streets. Would that be possible to bring somebody from the community onto the panel or to share their thoughts?
It's definitely something we can talk about. I know that we don't have a firm, like we haven't finalized our agenda for the next meeting, but we do have some topics that came up at the last meeting we want to get to. So I think our next meeting is going to be focused on sort of supportive services, behavioral health care, and those systems and connections. But Michelle, we should talk offline before the next meeting about that idea. I think that's a really good one. Okay, great. All right, I'm going to pass over to my colleague Jesse to wrap us up. Oh, sorry, Anne. Before we do that, Jesse, Anne, question.
Sorry, just what you mentioned for the next meeting. I wanted to kind of go back to Lori's comment and Ray's comment, which was, I think Ray said for every one person who is currently homeless, 2 more will become homeless. And then I think about Lori's comment about, you know, what about folks who are currently housed but on the verge potentially? Are we going to talk about that at the next meeting and what that looks like in terms of support for folks like that? Okay. Yes. Okay.
I was nodding in agreement that that's a really important topic. We don't have that on the list for the next meeting, but I'm hearing the prevention basically, right?
Yes.
How to keep people from losing their housing. I'm also seeing some nods from other task force members. Is that something that you would like to prioritize for a conversation at a meeting? Similar to this, where we focus on prevention, we talk about what it looks like, what's needed. Seeing some nods. Okay. All right. Yeah. I think given the time, we might split a meeting and cover a little bit on prevention, a little bit on another topic at the same meeting, so that we can get y'all covering. It's a big issue, as we've referenced. So, but yeah, that makes sense. Okay. Thanks, Vinay. Saying yes, I'd like to discuss that topic. Okay. We'll make sure you all get a chance to focus on prevention. Go for it, Jesse.
All right, thanks, Eli. So we just wanted to take a few minutes at the end of the meeting to give you all an update on the community engagement process. So I know we talked about this a little bit at the last meeting and introduced some of the plan for bringing in other folks from the community into this process. So based on your feedback from the last meeting, we've landed on a handful of focus groups. The focus groups will be happening in July, and we'll be incorporating some of the questions that you all identified as important to hearing about from this process. So we'll also be reaching out to the task force members to get your help in participating in the process, and really want to emphasize through this process that it's important to really touch as many groups as we can within the community. So we're looking to host a couple focus groups with folks who are currently or formerly unhoused. Also looking to talk with more homeless service providers that have connections to the city of Santa Clara, and also want to make sure that we're hearing from some neighborhood and business stakeholders to make sure that we're hearing sort of all the perspectives across the spectrum. I know at the last meeting we talked a lot about wanting to hear kind of making sure that we're raising up some concerns in the community and hearing kind of all the voices at the table. So we'll be having those focus groups in July. Another update on the next slide is just about the community forum. So we'll be hosting a community-wide meeting also as part of this process. So these task force meetings are open to the public, but this community forum will be a little bit different in that we will be formally inviting the public, the community to come to this meeting and share their thoughts, share their perspectives, share their ideas. It will be a virtual meeting, and we'll be posting more information about it on the website, but we wanted to get this date out to folks so that you all can save the date and participate in this meeting. We want to make it accessible to everyone. We'll be facilitating the meeting, but we're really hoping to have task force members present if you all are available, and may ask folks to play some roles in that meeting so that we can make sure that folks are getting an opportunity to hear from the community throughout this process. So we'll be providing some registration information, but that information will also be posted on the website, and we'll email that out to task force members. We go on to the next slide. Just have a couple more notes on wrapping up and kind of next steps for the task force. So wanted to highlight a few different action items for folks, opportunities for task force members to participate and be engaged in that community engagement process. So encourage you all to kind of think of ways that you might be interested in participating in some of the community engagement outside of the task force meetings, and to follow up with our team. Also, we'll be sending out some follow-up materials from meetings and encourage folks to review those and kind of the upcoming agendas for upcoming meetings. Sorry, I saw a question come in from the chat. Anne asked about a survey, and yes, we will be doing a survey. We did not send out a survey yet, though, so that that email link was not from us, but we will certainly let folks know when that survey is available. So on to the next slide, Eli. Just wanted to remind folks our next meeting will be, our fourth meeting will be July 28th from 6 to 8 p.m. Again, we'll be revisiting some of those discussion topics that the task force identified as priority areas for the city plan, and we'll follow up with a couple folks about some ideas that we heard today too for future meetings, and we'll be providing an update to the task force on some of the community engagement that will happen between now and then. So with that, I just want to thank everybody for joining us today. We're finishing right on time at 7:59. So I hope that everyone has a good rest of your evening, and thank you so much for your participation and engagement today.
Thank you all so much for your time.
Peace and love to you all. Bye.
Bye-bye, thanks.
Bye-bye.
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 All right, folks. I think should we shut off the webinar?
I think so. I saved the transcript.
Okay, save the transcript. We have the recording. We're good.